foot wingspan, 2,200 horsepower engines on them, you know, they were big. And so they decided, well, we're going to make that job a non-commissioned officer rather than an officer's position. And so they sent us up to transition training up at Mountain Home, Idaho.
In
Idaho. And it was there that I met the fellas, the other fellas that I would be flying with for the next 2 years. And it was September. Just a side note, my uncle Bob lived in Denver, and he didn't have any children, and I was like his as my mom's younger brother, and so I was like a son almost to him, or anyway. So we had an apartment in Denver, and we ran around with my uncle and aunt and so forth. It was wonderful, but so up to this time, my military life was nothing wrong with it at all. I was living as the high and the hog, you know, whatever. So we go up to Mountain Home, and she got a room, and I was on the base about an hour's ride from. She was in Boise, and I was in Mountain Home, and and in training there, even though we were officer, we didn't get off the base. We had to get a pass. You had to have free time, and you had to have a pass to get off. So she would come out to the air base, and so we did. At the air base, we did training in the B-24s, and bomb training. We used camera bombing. We were bombing Salt Lake City. We were bombing Boise, all these towns, but we did it with a 16 millimeter movie camera and put onto the site, and you photograph through the telescope that we had in the bomb site, and you could tell whether you were going to from that. And we did some actual bombing too. We did navigation, and we were in this normal transition operational training lasts about 3 months. And so on the January 1st, 1944, they decided they would send us to another base, and Tonopah, Nevada. Now, Tonopah is not susceptible to good flying because the air base was located in a valley, and the elevation of the airfield was 6,000 feet, and it had 1,000-foot mountains in the traffic pattern, and so we were lucky during the month that we were there, but I have read since then that from the time we were there until later in during the next year, why they lost a number of aircraft. I mean, quite the fact this fellow was going out that wrote the article in this magazine was going out and looking for wreckages in all over
The mountains.
that
yeah.
in the mountains all over that area. Because we were flying at night, we were flying the day, and we were flying down to past the Mojave Desert down to California, Blythe, and over the Rockies at 20,000 feet, and navigation missions and so forth. They put us on orders the end of, after we finished this month's training, the whole squadron was put on order to go to Virginia, to Langley Field, Virginia. We went by troop train, and we left Tonopah, and we got up halfway to what's the other in northern Nevada, anyway.
No.
Pardon?
Reno?
Yes, halfway to Reno, and they said, put us on a siding, and they said, we'll have to stay here. There's a munition train derailed ahead of us, and so we were on the siding for 2 days.
Oh my gosh.
And they had the town, the little town, only had one restaurant and a bar and a grocery, and we ate them out of food. And there was 230 of us, and they had to take a pickup went up to Reno and got some food, and because some of us got sick without any, being on a siding without any electricity. The food in the diner car, contaminated, and some of us got sick, and myself included.
Oh dear.
But so after they cleared the track, it was 6 days before we got to with the time that we had there traveling in this troop train to cross country to Virginia, and there the squadron received some training on new equipment. Radar was brand new in those days, secret, most of it, and this piece of equipment was a bombing computer. It's an electronic slant range computer. And so the mock-ups they had in the hangar, we did first, and this equipment was made for searching out subs and enemy ships, not so much warships, but tankers and supply ships for enemies, and they had two groups had gone through this training before we were there, and one was called the Wright Project, and Colonel Wright was the head of it, and he helped develop this equipment at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and they had very good success because it was used at low altitude, and it was night, and you go out and search and pick up these ships, or the subs that came up to surface to charge their batteries, you pick them up at night, and before they knew what we were doing, or, they at that time, they destroyed them. They didn't get the information back. They sunk numbers of ships. So they had, the first project was the 5th Air Force, which was down in New Guinea area. And the second project was the Scott project, and that was in the 13th Air Force, which was adjacent to the same area, Guadalcanal and that area. And so they were going to send us to China and to operate in the China Sea and Burma and that area, and operate out of China. And they were giving the pilots some training in Chinese, and we were flying out and practice bombing, and we had out off of Cape Henry, Norfolk area, they had these rafts with screens on them and build up, and the radar would pick that up, and they were anchored out there actually, and we would go out and we would bomb those at 800 to 1,000 feet, and so Lieutenant Pittman got pretty good at it. We had competition in the squadron, and out of the 23 crews, he got to be the top.
Good for you.
And so I had a number of direct hits, and out of the bombs we dropped. Well, come April, for some reason, unbeknown to the rest of the crew, the pilot got into an argument some way with the commanding officer, a major, which you do not do, and in the Air Force, especially during that time. So the commander, he didn't want this crew anymore. So even though we had good record, so here we go on air orders to Camp Stoneman, California, all the way back across the states, only by ourselves, no other, just the 10 of us. There was 4 officers, the pilot, co-pilot, navigator, and bombardier, and 6 enlisted men, which the enlisted man was engineer, which was an aircraft mechanic, and he was a gunner also, and the assistant engineer was also a ball turret gunner, a radar operator, and a tail gunner, and a radio operator, and an armored gunner. So there was 6 enlisted men. And so off we go on a train, and we go to Cincinnati, Chicago, and in Chicago I had to make sure we had to change trains and go to over to the Union Station, and we stayed all night there in the hotel, and I had to make sure it was my job anyway that the guys got up in the morning and they made the train. So we got on the city of San Francisco, which was a streamliner, and we at that time, and so we made 2-day trip, almost 2 days from Chicago to San Francisco. And so we were in Camp Stoneman, which was a point of shipping the fellas overseas. And we were on sealed orders, didn't know where we were going, and so we were there a week and had my birthday while I was there in 45 in April, and it was about that time why they took us down and we got on a Liberty ship. We thought we would get an aircraft to fly over to Hickam, you know, a bomber crew. They put us on a Liberty ship.
Oh, geez.
The Liberty ship was on its maiden voyage. It was commissioned down in San Diego. A ship about 340 feet long, and normally didn't carry passengers, but on this one they had 20 passengers. It had some earth-moving equipment on deck, and the holds were full of beer and mail. So off we go on the ship, and we did a zigzag course because the captain had already lost 2 ships under him, and this is a new ship for him. And so off we go on a zigzag course to someplace. And so the first mate, who is normally the navigator, he was interested in what the air crew did with the navigation. So he said, well, why don't you take a sunshot with me at noon? So he used his sextant, his regular, used the horizon, and Phil Riley, who was our navigator, used a bubble sextant called an octant, because up in the air we didn't have a horizon, and so you had a bubble. And so we took the sunshots at noon for our position. Well, because we were chatting with the first mate, we learned not only our position every day, but we learned where we were headed. We were headed to Honolulu. And so after an 8-day trip, we arrived in Honolulu, and the control at the harbor said, "What are you doing here?" You know, SS Joe Fellows was the name of the ship, and you're not due for another 2 days. We made a record crossing with this because of our light load and so forth, and the speed was 10 knots, which is a little more than somewhere around 12 miles an hour. But anyway, they take us out to Hickam, and they were going to interview us. We were at operations in the second floor of the operations building, and a major came in and from Bomber Command, 7th Air Force, and he said, "Welcome to 7th Air Force Hickam. We're going to send you down to Kwajalein," which had just been taken. And Weetalk and Kwajalein were the next islands. They came up from Tarawa up to the Gilberts, which is and the Marshalls, which is Kwajalein, and Weetalk is an island just short distance north of Kwajalein. the 11th Bomb Group was stationed there. We're going to send you down there as a replacement crew. Well, here's in my mind all this training that we were involved in before, and so nobody said anything, the other officers, and I said, Major, I said, we've been through some special training. Are we going to throw that aside? And he says, well, tell me about it. And so I had my records and so forth, and so I told him, and his eyes opened up, and he says, we have some aircraft over here in the hangar with this equipment, but we don't have any crews to operate it and so forth. We're going to send you up to a squadron here on Oahu, and we'll let you help us train these other fellas in this equipment. And so the whole picture was changed. So
Good for you for speaking up.
for me, you know. So the next day, we went up to the North Point, Kahuku, Hawaii, there on Oahu, and we met the 42nd Bomb Squadron, which is part of the 11th Group. They had been out of their 12 to 15 crews that they had in their, when they were down in the South Pacific at Funafuti and the Fujis. They only had, they lost all but 6 crews. So we were going to be a replacement crew, but also we were going to train in this new equipment. So the next day I met the radar officer and Captain Bunn, and he said he was overjoyed to have us, and he said, you know, in our area, which was controlled by the Navy isn't going to allow us to search for other ships. They don't trust the Army, that they might bomb one of their submarines or ships, you know, so they'll take care of it with their units. So he said, we're going to try to modify this equipment for higher altitude. So I spent a month with a technical rep from Western Electric, the radar officer, and myself, and we took the bombing tables that I had and we modified the equipment, the slant range computer, and for higher altitudes. So the limit was 2,000 feet before, and we extended the range on it up to 15,000 feet. And so once we had it modified, they said, well, we'll test it. So there was a real small island off the coast of Maui, and so I flew out and found it worked really good. I hit the little island from 10,000 feet, and so we had something different now. We could bomb at night, you know, and so now the crews, replacement crews coming over, most of them had the same training. So the new crews coming over would just have to use the equipment at higher altitude. So we trained through the summer. And in July, in June, we took Saipan. In July, they invaded Guam. And so by the time the island was secured, it was enough for our ground crew to move down there. It was August, and there's some 200 fellas in the ground crew.
So this would have been
When
August.
in advance, there were mechanics and armors and the executive officer, intelligence officer, and people in the squadron. The squadron is about 450 normally with full strength, with about 16 crews. They have about 16 aircraft
Okay.
in the squadron, but they're self-sufficient, though. They have, so they can operate, a squadron can operate on its own.
Okay.
They have facilities in all the fields, transportation, communication, and
Okay.
so forth, and have their own medical officer, flight surgeon, and so forth. So we got up to strength and trained, and they went down to Guam, and the area was secured. It was only from Agana, it's only about a mile up towards the north end, and north of the town, which had been pretty much destroyed, but during the invasion. But we didn't go down until the air crews until October. They had everything set up, and so that they arrived in September, and we flew down from Hickam to Johnson Island, to Kwajalein, and then to Guam. And we landed on an old Japanese fighter strip, coral. There was no concrete or asphalt. It was a coral strip. And there was still some wreckage of Japanese aircraft on the side of the runway. And in fact, here's a tent set up, not staked out, but with a pile of coral for a floor, and we had to spread it out, and canvas cots, and with mosquito netting up the side, and so we had a guard around our perimeter at night, and there shots going off and so forth. We still had Japanese around
Sure.
the area, and in fact they got so hungry that they would try to get into our mess hall to get food, and once we started flying out of there, our food that they gave us to eat during the flight, sometimes we wouldn't eat it and leave it in the